25th Tawheed session. The date is the 10th of March 2025. Time is 2022. We are on the second book, volume 2, page 26, chapter 3. The necessarily existent cannot be other than a singular entity. The necessarily existent cannot be other than a singular entity. This is because if there were two necessarily existent beings, one of them has to be distinguished from the other, at least in one attribute or consideration. Otherwise, they would be identical with no distinction. Therefore, it will be impossible to refer to one of them without referring to the other, express one of them without expressing the other, or speak of one of them without speaking of the other. That is to say, the two would be one thing, which contradicts the concept of dualism in the first place.
Or being two, yeah.
Hence, the one referred to would be two at the same time, from the same vantage point and the same consideration, and the two referred to would be one at the same time, from the same vantage point and the same consideration, which is an impossible contradiction.
Yeah. Someone may argue, I didn't do that in a very much detail. Someone argue, what's the problem if someone has a certain attribute the other one doesn't have? Meaning the other one is deficient in this aspect. Because if that necessary existent called A is having a certain attribute, like knowledge, for example, foreknowledge, for example, and this other one does not have, meaning one of them is not necessarily existing, is deficient in that. He has a deficiency. In every possible aspect, they must have the same full attributes, or the attribute is none for them. So they cannot be distinguished. They're two and one at the same time, which is impossible. So it's only one. All these features can similar to the mathematical proof for those who have a mathematical background, to prove that the unity in a group, either additive group or multiplicative group. And a unity in a multiplicative additive group is usually symbolized by the zero. In a multiplicative, symbolized by one, or the unit E, coming from German Einheit. And you prove easily, based on the axioms of the group and the basic structure of the multiplication, that if you assume there's two initial unities, E1 and E2, you prove quickly that E1 is equal to E2. It cannot have two unities. Because from the structure of the multiplication and the definition of a group. In algebra, that's algebra, the people who are. Anyone having some mathematical background here? Ever studied semi-groups, groups, fields, and rings and fields? Anybody has even put his nose in this area? It's a nice area of mathematics, algebraic structure. Then you can prove easily the uniqueness of the zero for additive groups and the one for multiplicative groups. 0 and 1 is just symbolic use for the neutral element. Essentially, an element with 0 plus any element A is equal A, and A plus 0 is equal A, both from left and right, and few other axioms. Then you prove there's only one 0. There's no 0, 1, and the 0 sub 1, 0 sub 2 is equal. 0 sub 1 is equal 0 sub 2. The same with the multiplication. E times A equal A. That's the meaning of it, is a unity, which similar to the one. One equals times any number is this number. It doesn't change the number. That's the definition of the one. It's a neutral multiplicative element. There's only one neutral multiplicative. It's the one only. It's a neutral. There's no two numbers called one A and one B. All of them is just the one, number one. It's so fundamental, dictated by necessity of formal logic and reason. The same here with the necessary existent. The same. The proof is the same level of strictness.
Also, if there's a slight difference in attribute, will they'll effectively be codependent anyway. So, which would then be the question that is something eternal.
Yeah.
How can it? Because, for example, if you imagine one, if it has a dependency, it is dependent on something else, or it's contingent.
Then it is not necessary. That's good.
Yeah.
If anyone depends anything else, is not necessarily existing. So it's absolutely independent. The first one we call A, and the same with B. Now, to distinguish them, I said that A is not equal B. We have two necessary existing beings, one of them must differ from the other in some aspect, and so we can point to him and separate him from the other one. But it can't be, because whatever distinction B has towards A, meaning he has something which A does not have, but it's compatible with his necessary existing. But A is supposed to be necessary existing. So he should have that one. But he doesn't have it. So it's not necessary existing, it's contingent. But we're confused and thought he's necessary existing. Or it is A equal B. There's no escape. Either one of them is contingent, or if both are necessary, they are the same. Okay.
Okay, inshallah. Hence, the one referred to would be two at the same time, from the same vantage point and the same consideration, and the two referred to would be one at the same time, from the same vantage point and the same consideration, which is an impossible contradiction. Accordingly, the two necessarily existent beings must differ in at least one attribute or consideration. The latter is to be necessary to one of the necessarily existent beings following the necessity of the necessarily existent being, which is one of the necessities of his existence. That's a bit convoluted. It couldn't possibly be necessary without it in that way and that manner. Thus, the one who lacks this attribute is not necessary.
Is a contingent, as I said. The one who lacks that characteristic, distinctive mark, must be then contingent. He lacks that.
Because he has lost one of the necessities of existence that his necessarily existent being requires. This fact is what makes him Mumkin, contingent, not Wajib, necessary.
Exactly.
Therefore, we are left with one necessarily existent being, not two, which is what is required to be proven. All that this attribute is unnecessary for his existence. He does not need it to bring about his existence as a necessarily existent being. Hence it is to be necessary for another existence, because his existence is purely a necessity, not contingency, nor with any other consideration. This is the meaning of the necessity of the necessarily existent being, which is an absolute conceptual necessity. So what does it say?
If there's any contingency there, خلاص, finish. It's not a necessarily existing being. If there's any contingency possibility, it may have that or have it in a certain proportion, so خلاص. Then concept of necessarily existing does not apply to that one. It's a contingent being.
So in other words, if it's a superfluous attribute, which so basically something that and it's of
It's
not
a mistake to think that this entity is a necessarily existing, because it has a certain attribute which is not found in other the alleged other necessarily existing being. They must be identical in every attribute.
Okay. Sorry, we're still talking about duality. Yeah. Okay. Nevertheless, this cannot be possible because the necessarily existent being does absolutely not need another existent. Otherwise, it would be a necessity and possibility at the same time, which is an impossible contradiction, or even worse than that, because we made the necessary in need of the contingent. So this codependency.
Yeah.
This is mind destroying. It is rather mind relapsing, a reversal of concepts. In short, pure madness. Therefore, it becomes mandatory that the concept of the necessity of the necessarily existent being can only be applied to one being, at the very least, and it shall not be applied to two or more. It was demonstrated formally that there should be at least one necessarily existent being. Otherwise, the existence of the universe or the creatures would be completely impossible, including the writer and the reader of these lines, as opposed to the necessity of sense, reason, conscience, and direct perception. Consequently,
so there must be a one necessary existing being at least, otherwise you cannot explain this contingent reality. That's number one. At least one necessary existing, and we have proven formally that if the two necessary existing being exist, no two can be exist. So the necessary existing being, if any, is only one. So maximum one, minimum one. Maximum one, minimum, what's the result? Only one. Only one. So the discussion previously proved that two necessary existing beings must be identical. It's maximum only one. Maximum. Maybe there's none whatsoever, zero. It's just an imaginary concept. But contingency of the universe dictate there must be some necessary existing being or more. Combine the two arguments, said it must be only one. There's only one necessary existing being. No more, no less. It cannot be zero, otherwise you cannot explain the contingent being, which we perceive immediately as contingent. We perceive ourselves as contingent by immediately. So there must be some necessary existing somewhere there, maybe several. But we prove formally from the concept of necessary existing that it can apply to only one entity. Result, there can be only one and no more than one, no less than one. Okay? Exactly like they prove in mathematics about something. We know these differential equation has solutions, several solutions possibly. And then we have another evidence from another source that the maximum, there's maximum, or there's a maximum of one solution of a certain type. And since we have proven that there are solutions, so it's only one solution of that type. That's a minimum maximum. We have a minimum of one, maximum of more than zero. So the only solution is one. In reality. While in the concept does not allow having more than one necessary existing being. Is there anyone outside there? That has to be verified. That's the evidence of the reality. And it proves that in any reality of contingent being, there must be one or more necessary existing being. But we have proven that concept of necessary existing being apply only to one being. So this can be only one, and there must be one at least. So only one there, in any possible reality imaginable, including the one around us. We don't care about other imaginary realities, but if we imagine them, they will have only one necessary existing being. Good.
Consequently, there
any
is
possible universe thinking being there will come to the same conclusion. There's no way you can get it anywhere.
Consequently, there is only one necessarily existent being. No more, no less, and it wouldn't be possible otherwise. This is the absolute unity of the necessarily existent being. The one is a necessity. Allah, there is no God in existence except Him, the Almighty, All-Wise. This unity or uniqueness of the necessarily existent being is absolute in Himself, which means that His existence does not depend on another existent. He is by greater reason not one of those who belong to a kind of multi-species genus. He is not one singular being in himself only, but rather unique in his attributes. That is to say, no one is equal or equivalent to him in any of these attributes, not even in one aspect or consideration of any kind of similarity or equivalence at all. This is the absolute unity of the necessarily existent being, which can be illustrated in the miraculous revelation, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Say, He is Allah the One, Allah the Eternal. He begot no one, nor was He begotten. No one is comparable to Him, and that's Surah 112, Surah Ikhlas, 1 to 4. Okay, so that concludes this chapter. We are now on chapter 4, page 28. The necessarily existent is a singular being not comprised of parts. The necessarily existent being cannot be other than a singular being, which is not comprised of parts, members, or separable independent essences in the first place. This is what the mutakallimin, theologians and philosophers refer to by saying the necessarily existent being is one in himself. One of the intelligible examples to Allah being the finest attributes is the following. The perfect geometrical mathematical point is simple. It can reasonably never be separated or divided. The proof regarding our former saying, the necessarily existent being is one in himself, is that if we assume that the necessarily existent being is dividable, which means he is composed of two essences, two parts, and each part can be even in principle and independent in essence, then one of the three following matters is inevitable. First, the two essences are separately necessary, which is impossible for two reasons. A, due to the impossibility of having more than one necessarily existent being, as mentioned above. B, if we estimate this absurdity that is possible, there would be no meaning to the composition, for each one of them is necessary in himself. His exist
What's the meaning of composition? Does not make any sense.
his existence does not depend on another existent. Sorry, this section when they talk about essences, is this against continue to speak about duality? Two essences, two parts.
No. Assume it's composed somehow.
Uh-huh.
Two attributes, two things which can be separated.
Uh-huh.
Then each one is either it is these. Let's assume in two things divided in two. Instead of saying divided in 100, we focus on just dividing in two. If it's dividing in two is impossible, then dividing in three is even worse. So let's focus on two. So A and B is composed from A and B. If both are necessarily existing, that's impossible. Well, the first reason is that A and B, A is necessarily existing, B is necessarily existing, but we have proven already that's only one necessarily existing there. Being can exist. So A equal B. So it's not composed. Composed are not composed. It's just absurdity. Even if we assume this absurdity to start with, then we have the issue. Each one of them is allegedly necessarily existing. So what the composition is doing? Why they're supposed to be composed? Is doing nothing, adding nothing to any one of them. So it's a composition and non-composition at this time, which is absurd. You see? So it can't be.
I don't get the second point. So you mean that so if they're two attributes and they're effectively because like they're two separate entities, then they would cancel each other out because or they would effectively it's not just redundant.
Two separate entities, separate persons. That's the response to the Trinity and other types of dualities and multiplicity and so on. If they are two or sharing the same substance or same essentiality or something like that, that's also not possible. Because if each one is somehow independent in some sense, if one is independent of some sense, then that's not each one is necessarily existing, but it's not possible because only one necessarily existing is there. So where the other come from? Secondly, even if we assume okay, there may be two necessarily existing beings, we don't know about the proof that is impossible. Then if each one is complete in himself, absolutely complete, necessarily existing, and the other one B is also. So what is the meaning of composition? What does a composition fulfill? Nothing. Adds nothing. Actually undermine the necessarily existing. Why they compose? Why they should compose? What's the reason for composition? Rational reason for composition. Nothing. It adds nothing. So it's just an imaginary composition. It's imagination running wild.
What do you think? So I'm just trying to understand conceptually when you make composition in terms of so one entity that's divisible.
Like the Christians say, I don't want to address the Christian only duality, two persons in one God.
I see. So
that's it.
Yes. Okay.
This person is not this person. So supposedly each one is a divine and eternal, necessarily existing thus. If that's so, that violates the principle there's only one necessary existing. So no, they actually share the same substance. Substance is necessary. Okay, fine, but that's joining. What they join? Which purpose they're joining? Self? Nothing, because everyone is complete in itself. So they are joined and not joined at the same time, because joining them will not increase their necessity or their perfection, nor it will decrease it. So it doesn't make any sense. Okay.
When you in reference to Christianity and effectively because how they frame
it. Christianity, duality also. A God who has a good side and bad side.
As in one entity and having these.
In any composite entity like that cannot be necessarily existing. And the component cannot be necessarily existing.
So Samad, for example, would be so. For example, something that is not composed. It's absolutely that is
like what?
When you say samad, for example, samad, as in not hollow. So, for example, not composed. The meaning.
That's something else. We go to whole. This is the perfection itself. But let us go just with the composition in the abstract sense, putting things together.
Also, if anyone wants to comment on this or quiz further, because I'm not necessarily strong on the Kalam side of things. So if anyone has wants to interject and ask further questions, feel free, inshallah. Yeah.
Make a diagram. Put two sticks next to each other. You combine together. A new being composed of two sticks is stronger, possibly, if you bind the two sticks. But each stick is contingent. It can improve by binding. But if each one is infinitely strong and infinitely varying everywhere, bind with what? Where? How? Make simple examples like that. Yeah.
Okay. I broke the hand enough. Got somebody to ask a question. Far away, bruv. Can't hear you yet, bruv.
Islam, can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Yeah. It's philosophy, fair enough. Just trying to remember from last week, I had a headache. The point you're making is that there's the different sciences. It's not been completed from looking at it from Tawheed perspective, whether it's Kalam or maths, in terms of from Muslim to make it formulaic, it's crystal clear. Going through this, make it indisputable.
It's a science in progress. We are adding more. Maybe the next generation will add more.
And the issue
they can formalize more in form of even equations, maybe.
The point you just mentioned before finishing the chapter was in any reality. The point that is that, whether it's imaginary or talking about Jannah or Jahannam, whatever. The point is that from the perspective, looking at ideas in and of itself, it resides in human minds. Doesn't matter the genius of any human being. Because of human beings themselves are limited and dependent and imperfect. By definition, they will never be able to leave that remit because that's how they're created. So whatever thoughts that they have.
What has that to do with this discussion? Just to clarify today, or it is the previous discussion. What's the point you are trying to expose?
The point I'm trying to make is that regardless of what thought, whatever idea that any human being tries to come up with, they're always going to be restricted anyway in and of itself as one component, the human mind. So whatever idea that they look at, whether it's in maths or different realms, theoretical, to prove that there's
things like this as hand waving. There are certain ideas which are so fundamental, shared by any mind, which can be called mind, in any universe or any reality.
Cause and effect.
There are other ideas which related to the contingency of that thinking entity and is limited to its scope.
Yeah.
Also, there's some things which you have to take as a given.
Have such a sweeping argument like that.
Also, we have to take certain things as a given, because if we're going to start from a premise of a rational mind,
we start from that we have consciousness and we can look in ourselves and see we seem to be able to rationalize about things and recognize that we exist and recognize certain fundamental concepts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we regard that as the only thing which made us access the reality, because otherwise we have to assume that we are mental, we cannot find any truth, and we will be in absolute doubt about everything. But it's not a sustainable state. If you can sustain it, you will be in the mental institution. So we excluded that case. Based on that, looking at the universe, we came, at least in our reality, there is a necessarily existing being, which is one, which is the free agent, etc. And obviously he has a conscious and infinite conscious because he's necessarily existing, so has the utmost complete conscious imaginable.
Agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The absolute conscious imaginable. He has no limited in horizon. For example, when you close our eyes, imagine at the surface of the earth, we imagine it's like flat going at infinity, because our vision, our mental vision, and our physical vision is limited by scope, limited by angle, and things like that. His is not limited. How? We cannot specify, but it's not limited. We know this fundamental principle. And because he's the creator of the universe, we assume that he created us with this consciousness, gave us this consciousness, which is at least valid in the fundamental aspect. It's a valid reason. If it's an invalid reason, nothing can be ascertained. So we assume, trusting that he gave us that consciousness, this mind, which is valid. At least give us basic truth, at least. Yeah?
Yep.
At least in this reality. So in any other possible reality, in any necessary existing being, our mind can guess that there will be similar fundamental characteristics, even if we cannot imagine what that reality may be. But because there will be a necessary existing being, naturally, no escape from that. And his consciousness is the absolute one. And if he creates being, and by being virtue, complete and perfect, he will not create deficient being and give them injunction because they are unable to fulfill the injunction with a deficient reason. So their reason may be limited, but it's valid in its domain. In a limited circle, it is absolutely valid. It's a projection of the divine consciousness onto the finite. But that projection in its domain is as valid as the divine consciousness. So the issues of contradiction, the issues of necessary existing, all of them are valid and correct. So that's the starting point. We finished with that last time. That's the meaning of all this discussion, but it has to be more structured, more details. That's
No, that's fine. Exactly right.
yeah. So we have to trust this reason that it can find at least fundamental facts, essential structure of the reality. If it cannot find, then nothing can be asserted. You can't be even sure that you exist or not exist. But this is manifestly absurd. That's a situation which is good for the mental institution. As a matter of fact, the people in a mental institution may very well write at the door, beware, don't cross this door. Mental people are outside. Very legitimate if they write that. And we write from outside, careful, don't enter without someone giving you protective cover because there are mental people inside. Who is true, who is false, we don't know. Because we have agreed that there's nothing can be certain. That's an absolute check. But this state is a state which is nothing can be ascertained. Is a state which cannot be sustained. Nobody can stay in that state at all. After some time, you recognize that you are sick and you wake up, or you stay in that state and you are a mental institution and nobody can understand. You are living in another world. No, you may communicate with people with some words, but you think completely different than the other people. And since the majority of the people outside the mental institution agree on these principles, and we apply them to machines which are separate from our being, and they work in form of engineering, we can conclude fairly that we can trust our reason, that it finds characteristic of the reality, which seem to be valid and true. While those in the mental institution have never designed a plane or designed a machine or engine or anything like that. This is impossible. They cannot ascertain anything. And they cannot do any mathematics or physics or that. So what we have seems to be at least give us a glimpse of the reality, a good glimpse of basic things. That's it. That's trusting that reason. And if you go to this revealed scripture, that later down the road, it's أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. So Allah is appealing to that. The one He created, جَعَلَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. So He cannot ask you to be thankful for giving you something faulty. That is not befitting for necessarily existing comprehensive being. It's befitting for a mental entity, for someone mischievous and idiotic, not for a necessarily existing being. So we have to trust that. This is the fundamental core of trust. That you trust at least your reason, that it can achieve at least something in discussing the reality and discussing even the one which is part of the reality but not accessible to senses, only by rational and logical analysis. We have to be cautious that we don't make mistakes or make analogy and expand things more than necessary. Yes, and we have to be careful that most of the time we use metaphorical example. Like I said, we use the model of a geometric point, which cannot be divided just of one simple, absolutely simple point. That's only an imaginary model, so we can make something in our mind, because we have to have something to visualize as limited being. We have no capability to understand this indivisibility or the uniqueness and singularity of the necessary being except giving example. And that's exactly what the Prophet said in the hadith when he was asked by some people from Yemen, أين كان ربنا قبل خلق السماوات? Where was our Lord before creation of heaven and earth? He wouldn't be possible to answer. He was nowhere, and there's nothing called space. That's too much for the common Bedouin and common people. That may be acceptable for someone graduating from the Athenian Academy of Plato, but not for the common people. So he has used a metaphor of space and time. What he answers, كان في عماء ما فوقه هواء ما تحته هواء. He was in darkness or in blindness or something unconceived called عماء. Surrounded with hawa. Hawa, meaning is, in this case, meaning this empty space, not air, definitely, because there was nothing. Air is in there, some other up. So you imagine like a point surrounded with nothingness. That's only a mental image, it's not the reality. We know it's a model, so you can take a look to it. I understand. That's amma, ma fawqa wa ma tahta hawa. This is correct. It's a model. And model a simple Bedouin can comprehend, and the philosopher in the Academy of Plato in Athena can understand. People understand immediately. This is just using an example from space-time, because we cannot envisage things in our mind except by this. And this is one of the hadith is quite strong and valid. That's one of the evidences of prophethood. It's the only answer we can be given to everyone, which is valid in itself, although it is in some sense giving an example, a geometrical example. كان في عماء ما فوقه هواء وما تحته هواء. That's correct. As a model. I mean, there was nothing. He's the only thing existing there. Nothing above him at the right and left. But you cannot tell the common people nothing. They will make no concept. So you say hawa and amma. Okay, understood? But if you analyze in a philosophical level, we do these laborious things a little bit. I didn't do them too much there, but at least some main things which can be formalized and discussed based on the just conceptual analysis. Not going into imagining space and time and so on. These are difficult things because in these you have to appeal to the mental vision, which is like transporting the external vision, which we know how it works with geometric optics and radiation, into the mind. Close your eyes and imagine things like that. It's again imagining things in space and time. There's no way you can imagine anything else. In that frame of imagining space and time in the mind, extending them indefinitely, things like that, if it is done cautiously with mathematical precision, it works. It produces good mathematics, inconsistent, non-contradictory mathematics, and you can relate to things a little bit better than just with mere words and abstract concepts, which only very hardcore philosopher and mutakallimin can deal with. That's it. That's how the deal works. Here I try to give a bit of glimpse, touching there, where even just discussing the concepts without going in space and time and these problems suffice. We stick to that. Okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Read on Dash. So
Yes,
that's it. So composition is not, it cannot be composed because each component must be a separate being. Either the two components A and B. It can be 3, 4, 5, but it's enough to study 2. If 2 is impossible, then 3 is even more impossible, etc., etc. So do A and B. So A must be necessary existing and B necessary existing. That's impossible by itself because there can be only one necessary being, not 2. So where is this B has come from? But let's assume, as I say, a reduction absurdum, assume there are 2 necessary existing beings. Ignore what we have proven already. Assume the impossible. Even this will not solve our problem. Because you cannot, if you have 2 necessary existing beings, you cannot put them together and produce something new. Because the putting together does not make any sense. They are already complete. They are already necessary existing. Putting them, what does the meaning of putting them together? Does not make any sense. You put in a machine, in a car engine, for example, is made a top part and the bottom part, and they screw together with a gasket in between. They put together, they will complete the functionality because neither the top can do the function alone, only part of the function, and the bottom. Then it makes sense to put them together, but this is contingent, this is contingent, this deficient, this deficient. By putting them together, we improve the the work and screw them together tightly with a gasket in between to prevent oil from going out, because metal does not really fit properly. The gasket will do that. We understand that. But all of these things are contingent, and they can be improved upon by screwing together. But what a purpose of putting two necessarily existent beings together? None. If any one of them can be improved by this, mean in case he was before that deficient, he's then contingent. He's not existent. That's the second consideration. See the third consideration. What does it say? Let's continue.
So that's first A, B. Then the second is one of them, let us call it the first, is necessary, and the other one is contingent. This is impossible as well because this composition is completely meaningless.
Yeah.
To illustrate, the first is necessary in himself. The basis of his existence is himself, not anyone else. In other words, he does not need any additional or complement, neither outside of himself nor from anything external. This is absurd even more than the previous point because the composition requires the need of the necessary to the contingent. It is worse in the balance of mind than the need of the necessary to the necessary.
Yeah.
So in this sense, basically having a primer, effectively an necessary primer, and then something that's derived from it. It's even more absurd.
Or it's supposed to be independent, another entity, just scratching it like you have an engine, which is function and so on, and you decide, it looks ugly. Let me just add something there to make it look beautiful. So that engine, you can't do that for the engine, maybe, if you're stupid enough to waste money and so on in putting an arc or something to make it look nice and beautiful, or maybe put a picture of the Mona Lisa engraved on it, maybe to make it beautiful. But means even the original one did not have the complete beauty. It's a contingent. It makes sense there. Always stupid, obviously, to put the Mona Lisa picture on an engine to make it look nicer. But if the necessary existing being is completely beautiful, does not need any accretion or addition. So why adjust to it or chunk attach to him some contingent being? For what purpose? What does it do? Nothing. It's actually stain him. It's a stain on him. It's not an addition of perfection. He's already perfect. You are staining him. You're coming to the picture of the Mona Lisa and painting over it, essentially, with paint, destroying it, actually. So undermining the necessary existing being, making him ugly, making him deficient. Okay, the third option.
Third, the two essences are contingent separately, which is impossible, as mentioned earlier. The mumkinat, contingents, no matter how composed they are, cannot become necessary beings in the first place.
By composition, yeah, because they each one is contingent, and then if we compose them, then the new entity, which is the compositional itself, is the parts are contingent, and the new entity requires the composition. So it is even more contingent, even weaker in matter of rank of existence. So it doesn't help. It doesn't make it necessarily existing ever.
Yeah. Dependent plus contingent plus contingent stays contingent.
So a necessary existing being is unique in itself. It can't be composed of two entities which can be separated.
Absolutely.
And regarded as two different persons, two different beings. Yeah.
Rather the composed contingent is weaker, to be a necessarily existent being, because of his need for composition in addition to the contingency and weakness
of the parts. This is nonsensical.
Of each one of them separately. And if you wish, you can say that the composed needs his parts and an agent to compose and join the parts together.
Yeah.
Hence, an existent who needs another existent cannot be a necessarily existent being.
Yeah.
Here is a concrete example. A piece of cast steel molded from one mold is stronger than another one, which was made of two pieces welded or fastened with screws.
Yeah. It's clear. One made in a block, cast from a block right away, is usually much stronger than the same shape piece made of two pieces. Normally they do that because of necessity. They cannot cast that shape or difficulty of casting and so on. Nobody would do, but if it can be cast in one piece, that's always the way to be preferred. Otherwise, you do in two parts, and then either they weld them after that, or you screw them together. And this is definitely weaker than having an originally one cast. And then expand that to ad infinitum in strength. Then it has become clear. There's no way you can get the one merged by welding or by screw ever competing with the one which is cast right away, especially if it's a cast infinitely large or it's really infinite in itself. So there's no way to get a necessary existing by joining bits and pieces who are contingent. That's just rationally impossible. And this example is just to illustrate something so you can enjoy looking at the example of casting something in one cast, also in two pieces, and then joining them by screwing or by welding or things like that. And that's the reason that wherever they can do parts of machine by casting, they do it. Wherever they can do it. That's stronger and more durable and so on. And they're taught welding and so on only dictated by necessity, because either the cast is impossible to make or whatever problem there, or if it's too big or too heavy or does not fit or something like that. Okay?
This proof also applies to the conceptual composition, just as it applies to the actual composition.
Mm-hmm.
Because the necessarily existent being may not be composed of existence and quiddity. I'm not sure what quiddity means.
Meaning this called the what is. Because, like, for example, the philosophers say that human being is an animal composed with mind and so on. So it's a composition of something called humanity with a mind. This is just abstract, coming from abstraction from the reality. We saw many humans, they differ in color, differ in eye shape and so on, but they seem to have joint characteristics. And the joint characteristic is called the quiddity, the essence. And that's essentially the capability of language. And it is the capability of expressing of themselves in language means a certain level of rationality. That's what distinguishes them. So that's the reason I say humans are language-enabled animals. They are animals. The body is like a gorilla and so on, but all the characteristics, a small variation, definitely, because animals differ in variation and hormones and so on. Yeah, we understand that. But what makes them unique, several from other animals, obviously the different counts of the chromosomes and so on, but that makes them really different. Worthy of classification as a certain species or category by itself or certain characteristic is that ability of language, حيوان ناطق, a rational being. So that's its essence. It's an animal with a rationality. But this is philosophical discussion, but it has some import in responding to Trinity, because the Trinitarians say that these three persons of the Trinity, they're different persons, but they share a substance or a quiddity or something like an essence. But for the necessary existing being, there's nothing called essence, because there are no two or more necessary existing which we can see what's the common characteristic. It's none. It's only one being. So nothing can be shared there. It's only one. But humans are plenty. What they share, we can extract what's shared by rational observation.
This is similar to, I remember on the Kalam video, you mentioned about essence and attributes.
Yeah.
And he said it's effectively just almost like a reflection of one entity.
Yeah.
Or some words to that effect. So it's not.
And that solves many problems. So it's called attributes in time past and so on. Most of it is hogwash anyway. It doesn't make any sense for the necessary existing being. For contingent being, you can say whatever you want about these things. You can by studying, by abstraction and so on. But for necessary existing, there's no quiddity in the sense, because there's only one. There's only one quiddity if you have a class of things and they have common characteristics. Then you look at them, they all share this. Yeah, we know there's some humans who are born mentally incapacitated. These are singular cases. But as a human, generally, they have the capability of language and they have certain rationality. So we conclude this is part of their fundamental characteristics. And all these persons, individual persons, Muhammad al-Mas'ari, Rash, Shaykh al-Islam, this and this and this, they share in these characteristics. In abstract, really, not in the real, in abstract. Because this is really by abstraction, by deduction, and so on. Even there, for this thing, there's nothing called quiddity. Because there's only one. He is his own quiddity. But this is an area I didn't want to discuss very much there, because if you go to the issue of quiddity, the question will soon arise, what's quiddity? Is there something existing outside or just abstraction of the mind? Almost certainly you can analyze and develop the idea further, and you see the quiddity even for humans, for animals, and so on, use essentially an abstraction. It exists in the mind, it doesn't exist outside. That's the best point of view. It's just a pointer to something which does not exist. It's just an abstraction from the reality. It has no existence outside.
It's almost like an image or a mirage.
Something like that.
Like a reflection of something.
It's really Aristotelian philosophy relies on this heavily. But if you look deeper, you will recognize that it is that. And they discussed what is primary. Is it the quiddity or the being? Or say, in the case of Necessary Existent, we don't know about our head what's primary or secondary. His quiddity is his existence, and his being is his quiddity, because there's only one. There's not many you can extract, or there is only one with these characteristics. But this is an area which is anyway dead. I don't think it's worth studying. People study that in time past, and they have waged war against each other in that area and accuse each other. For example, the Ash'ari accused the Mu'tazila that they deny the attributes, which is not true. They deny that the attributes are separate from the being. It's just nonsensical. And they put that in the books of Aqidah.
Yeah, like obedience to parents is the part of the Aqidah now for us. But Khalis. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
His existence is pure with no quiddity. If you ask what is it, the answer would be he is a necessarily existent being, the one and only.
One and only. So, not like what's a human? Human is a language enabled or a rational animal. Yeah, that's. So you use animal, which is something wider than human, and the rational expression, which is expressed in language, that's also a concept. You can make sense. You can see it outside reality. Realize the many individuals. That makes sense that you can say that. But for Necessary Existing, it doesn't make any sense. What is it? It is him. There's only one. He is the one and only. That's it. So if you want to talk quiddity about the Necessary Existing, his quiddity is his being, is his existence. There's no difference between these. If you want, I would advise not to work with quiddity, because it could be misleading and lead to problems. But we don't need that really. I'm just mentioning that as just a casual note. So that issue is addressed, because it was addressed in time past by Mutakallimin, Mu'tazila, and they were waging intellectual wars, and sometimes even wars with the sword against each other for something which is just manifestly rubbish. For us now, it's manifested. At that time, it looks like as heavy as a mountain, which is not. It was never.
Well, the entire distinction with Mu'tazila is they're still used today to denigrate anyone.
Yeah, because people love to have these things, and then partisanship plays role, and they become disagreement because of transgression and hostility, not because really good rational reason dictates that.
Yes, weaponized.
And each one misquote other. For example, the Ash'ari, because the Mu'tazila they deny attribute. They say Allah is Alim, because the Quran says He's Alim, without ilm. Without ilm. What the Mu'tazila says, Allah is Alim without ilm, separate than His entity. Again, the issue of quiddity and essence and so on. But they misquote it with A'udhu Billah. They deny that Allah has ilm, but He has the name Alim. What's meaning the name Alim without ilm? Seems to be absurd. The way it's quoted is absurd. And each one misquote the other one to make him look bad. That's all that's called مختلف فيه الذين أوتوه بعد ما جاءهم العلم بغيا بينهم. This is baghi, this translation. Just you want to show that the other side is wrong and ugly and bad, although it is not. And then you start misquoting, start playing words, you start all kinds of mischief.
Intellectually dishonest.
the intellectual dishonesty, not really honesty. See, oh, there's a certain point there we have to analyze and think about it. No, you get stuck in that area and then you start misquoting and so on. It's old disease. It's nothing new. It's since ancient time.
With that in mind, the answer cannot be it is of a specific kind, a specific category, or a specific type.
Exactly. Yeah.
As for the composition of essence and attribute, if it is accurate to call its composition, it is not forbidden based on this proof because the attribute is dependent on the thing being described. It is not an essence in the first place, otherwise it would not be an attribute.
Mm-hmm.
There is no reasonable separation, there is no capability of separation at all. As such, by the absolute conceptual necessity required by the meaning of the word attribute, it is completely impossible for a separation to take place.
Mm-hmm.
This is the absolute of al-ahadiyya, the absolute oneness of the necessarily existent being, and al-ahad, the absolutely one, is a necessity which can be illustrated in the miraculous revelation, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Surah Ikhlas, saying one,
He's not only wahid, but he's also ahad, meaning in himself is only one. He's one as seen from outside, but from inside he's only one. He's not composed, he's just absolutely simple. That philosophy says absolutely simple, is not composed.
Here, as-Samad, the self-sufficient master, and its linguistic equivalence of as-Samad, with a T, which is referred to something that is solid with no holes, and this concept or meaning is a concrete example. As for everything else, it is anything with no emptiness, lack, or non-existence.
That's
In other words,
explanation of Samad. He said, الذي لا جوف له, the one who has no internal cavity, no internal holes. So what does this mean? Take a material example. I'll mention a material example in a few minutes. Continue reading. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In other words, anything that has no deficiency in its material substance, element, or attribute. Additionally, by the necessity of perception and reason, we know that the solid steel bar is firmer and stronger and more difficult to break than the steel tube. The tube is a hollow bar, which is similar to it in material length and diameter. The less bore, the greater the strength and solidity. Even the least educated and simple-minded Arabs realize that a solid stick is stronger than the common reed or the hollow bamboo stick. Thus, the necessarily existent being is an absolute samad, a necessarily absolute, complete absolute existent, with no holes, emptiness, nor non-existent defect or lack thereof. He is strong and solid, and his strength and durability have no end or limit. Allah, there is no God except Him. He is as-Samad, the strong and firm.
In the real material universe, we don't have anything Samad real in absolute sense. We have, for example, a steel bar and the tube. We may crush the tube to become having no hole, but still there are between the atoms and the molecules, there's a space. We crush further inside the stars, for example. In neutron stars, we crush it until the all nuclei are touching each other, but still there is some gaps there. You can crush further until you get to black hole, and you can crush further and so on, because all of these are contingent and still have gaps. Imagine the process going ad infinitum. You will end something like a point, imaginary point. Obviously, in the material world, it doesn't go there, because if you crush further, then the crushing energy will turn into new particle and it radiates outside. The black hole will evaporate. That's in the material world. So the model, the extension in the mind is just an abstraction which does not exist in reality, cannot exist in reality in the material world. But we can imagine that a being which is absolutely solid, no deficiency, no gaps whatsoever. Mathematical point, essentially, if we want to use the concept of space and time. Mathematical point. And in eternity, before the creation of heavens and earth and the rest of the creation, is just fi amma, above him, around him, and so on, nothingness, which is called hawa.
Okay, that concludes that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
We're now on page 31.
As I said, read that several times. If necessary, make that diagram, design a tube, think about it. Try to make your own models. You may find other examples which are more pleasing for you. That's the way to go. Next section or chapter,
Okay.
whatever.
Yeah, so the next chapter is chapter 5, scholarly discourse on the necessarily existent. And we can probably finish this chapter and then call it a day.
What's the time now?
It is 11:17. So we've
we still have good time. Huh? We may go until 12.
you maybe just before, just
okay.
Earlier scholars adopted varying ways to prove that the necessarily existent being cannot be other than one singular being, not comprised of parts. From a unique perspective, the genius Imam and outstanding scholar Abu Muhammad Ali ibn Hazm, may Allah be pleased with him, said the following, some of which is similar to what we have briefly stated earlier, and some parts are slightly different. Abu Muhammad ibn Hazm said, He is Allah, there is no other God except Him, that Almighty is one, without beginning, without end. The proof concerning that we have established by necessity in the previous inquiry is that the entire world is created, that it has a creator. If there were more than one creator, then they would be mutually limited by number, countable. What we have previously established is that what is countable has a beginning and an end. It is therefore created. Moreover, another evidence, for every two entities they must be different and differentiated. If completely identical, it would not be possible to distinguish one from another.
That's our argument is. The first argument is not that strong or not that appealing, but this one is that what we chose to expand about.
Yeah, that's pretty profound for him to have come up with this so long ago. Moreover, another evidence, for every two entities they must be different and differentiated. If completely identical, it would not be possible to distinguish one from another. One entity must be distinguished from the other by certain features that the other doesn't have. If that is composed from itself and another attribute which is distinguishable from another, every composed being is contingent, therefore created. All arguments necessarily lead by necessity to the conclusion that the Creator is a single being, completely different from his creation in all respects. Hence, he, the exalted, is contrary to that arguments related to multiplicity. He never ceases. If it had not been as such, then he would be part of the universe, a created component. Allah is far above that. He is one, not of a multiple. He, the Almighty, said, There is nothing like him, and no one is comparable to him. While commenting on the following verses, with the great Imam Fakhr al-Razi said in his seminal work, Mafatih al-Ghaib, or commonly referred to as Tafsir al-Kabir, Allah said, Do not take two gods, for He is the one God. I alone am the one that you should hold in awe. Everything in the heavens and earth belong to Him. Everlasting obedient is His right. Will you heed anyone other than Allah? Whatever good things you possess come from Allah, and when hardship afflicts you, it is to Him alone you cry out for help. Yet when He has revealed you of your hardship, lo and behold, some of you attribute partners to your Lord. Let them show ingratitude for the favors we have shown them. Enjoy your brief time, soon you will know. And that is 16:51 to 55. And know that, so this is commentary, know that Allah the Almighty showed in the first verse that everything except Him, whether in the world of spirits or in the world of bodies, belongs to Him, and it is submissive and subjugated to the majesty and supremacy of Allah the Almighty. In the verse that follows, He forbade associating anything with Him in worship, and commanded that His kingdom and everything except Him belongs to Him, and He is not in need of anyone. He said, Do not take two gods. Ithnain, two. There is only one God. There are several points to be discussed in this verse. So again, this is continuing the commentary. The first point, one may say that Ilahain, two gods, should be Ithnain, two. So what is the point of so what is the point behind saying Ilahain, two gods, Ithnain, two? This question can be answered in the following ways. The first, the author of Al-Nazm, said, "There is a preceding and following. One of them goes first and the other goes after. It is as though he said, do not take ithnain, two ilahin, two gods." The second, this one is more accurate for me. When someone wants to exaggerate in expressing something that is denounced and repugnant, she will use many words so that the succession of these words makes the mind stop at its ugliness. With that in mind, and saying that there are two gods is reprehensible in the mind. In this
That's
context,
just to explain why that's تاخذوا إلهين اثنين. إلهين means two. In Arabic we have dual, but confirming that and stressing it by اثنين.
this is kind of a balagh, rhetorical.
Balagh and eloquence and so on. That we don't bother very much about that. al-Razi addresses also these issues, which do not concern us very much. This is the issue of balagh and the ijaz and so on. Now let's go to continue to get to the philosophy or the kalam aspects and logic aspect of all that. Yeah.
In this context, none of the rational people say that there are two gods, equal in necessity, eternity, and the attributes of completeness. So when he said, do not take ilahain, two gods, ithnain, two, what was intended from this repetition is to emphasize the alienation and make the mind stop at its ugliness. The third, the word ilahain, two gods, is one word which refers to two things, two gods. The affirmation of God and the affirmation of plurality of gods. When he said, "Do not take two gods," it was not known from this expression whether the prohibition applies to the affirmation of God or the affirmation of the plurality of gods, or both of them. And when he said, "Do not take two gods," it was confirmed that "do not take ilahain, two gods, ithnain, two," is a prohibition of affirming the plurality only. I see. So singling out that attribute of duality. The fourth, dualism is inconsistent with divinity, and it can be explained from different aspects. The first, if we assume that there are two existent beings, and each one of them is necessary in himself, then they would have shared self-existence and differed in necessity. So there is a difference between the two, for each one of the existent beings is composed of two parts, and each composed is mumkin, contingent. Then it was confirmed that saying there is more than one necessarily existent being denies the fact that they are necessarily existent beings. The second, if we assume that there are two gods and one of them tried to move an object and the other one tried to do the opposite, neither of the actions would take place for one of them, is worthier to take the action than the other, and the movement and stillness do not accept division or disparity at all. If that is the case, then it becomes impossible for the capacity of one of them to be more complete than the capacity of the other. If that was proven, then it becomes impossible because one of the two capacities is an ultimate capacity. And if that was proven, then one of the three possibilities would happen. Both of the gods' wishes would take place, which is impossible. Neither of the gods' wishes would take place, which is impossible as well. Or neither the gods' wishes would take place at all. So effectively cancelling each other out. This is profound for this to come out so long ago. Thus, each one of them would be powerless, and the powerless cannot be a god. So it was proven that the claim that there are two gods negates the fact that each one of them is a god.
Exactly.
The third, if we assume that there are ilahin, two gods, ithnain, two, then one of them will either be able to cover up his kingdom from the other or not. Or if he could do so, then he is a god and the other one is weak. And if he could not, he is weak. The fourth, that one of them is either capable to disobey the other or not. This gives rise to the following three scenarios. If he is not strong enough to disobey him, then he is weak. If he disobeys him, then the other one, in case he could not defend himself, is weak. If he disobeys him, then the defeated, is weak. It was proven that duality and divinity are antonyms, so opposing, yeah.
Opposite, yeah.
When he said, "Do not take ilahin, two gods, ithnain," the intention is to warn against the incompatibility and opposition between divinity and duality, and Allah knows best. Know that when the Almighty mentioned these words, he said there is only one God, meaning that when the foregoing proofs proved that the universe must have a God, it was proven that this is impossible to say that there are two gods, and that it was proven that there is no God except Allah. He is Al-Wahid, the One, Al-Ahad, the Only, Al-Haq, the Truth, As-Samad, the Self-Sufficient Master. It can be noticed that Imam al-Razi has briefly discussed what we have mentioned above from the absolute proofs about the oneness of God, with the following proof. The impossibility of dualism and composition of the necessarily existent being, which is fully satisfactory. It is not based on any premises except for the concept of the necessity of existence only.
It's
In
almost a
addition,
mathematical proof, almost like proving that there's only one number one, not two ones in the numbers, and or 1 0, not 2 zeros, etc. Is as compelling, as fundamental as this.
In addition to that, he briefly mentioned some of the main aspects of another proof of the oneness called Burhan at-Tamamu, which is usually mentioned when interpreting his saying, "May His Majesty be glorified and exalted." واتخذ الله من ولدي وما كان معه من إله أذ أذهب إذا ذهب كل إليه بما خلق ولا على بعضهم على بعد سبحان الله أما يصفون. Allah has never had a child, nor is there any God beside him. If there were, each God would have taken his creation aside and tried to overcome the others. That's 23. May Allah be exalted above what they describe, and that's 2391. We will come back to simplify and complete this proof in one of the next chapters, not only for proving the oneness of God, but also for its paramount importance in defining the word ilah. So that concludes that chapter. So any commentary, inshallah, we'll consider this. We'll stop here.
The two scholars are having similarity and dissimilarity. Al-Razi is discussing the ayah. Don't take or don't adopt two deities because there's only one divine being, and he expand that with the various logical evidences and also Burhan al-Tamanu, which is a little bit easier for the common people to understand, which is mentioned in Surah Al-Mu'minun. which will have a chapter for that. ما اتخذ الله من ولد وما كان معه من إله إذا لذهب كل إله بما خلق ولا على بعضهم على بعض سبحان الله عما يشركون. That will be addressed in another chapter. Classification, which kind of deities could possibly conceivably exist.
That will be next week, inshallah. Inshallah, we're around. Okay, anyone got any questions related to text, or I'll allow everyone to unmute, inshallah.
So what the next chapter? Is it too big?
It's a few pages, but it's getting a bit late now. It's about it's about another 9 pages.
It's good for Ramadan to have just a bit, so we keep the routine without going overboard. Yeah, good.
Inshallah. Anyone got any questions?
So these things need to be read several times, and if you need to make a diagram or something, have a sheet of paper or a scrap paper or something like that, like photocopies. The back side is clear. Just use it for scrapping there, and then just make a drawing, make something like a tube, and compare things. Try to have models and things like that until it becomes clear.